Could a forgotten market built on the bones of ancient rivers truly be the birthplace of a world-shaking age? Was it a desperate gamble by seafaring kings, fueled by ambition and the glint of silver, or something far stranger, a convergence of cultures and a hunger for the unknown? Forget dusty chronicles and scholarly debates. Let's dive into the muddy banks of the Baltic, where shadows danced with the scent of wood smoke and the whispers of forgotten gods. Imagine a world where the sun barely kissed the horizon in winter, and the sea was a relentless, gray beast. Scandinavia, a jagged claw of islands and fjords, was simmering with a restless energy. Kings, not bound by land but by the sway of the waves, were carving out their domains. They weren't building empires of stone and steel, but kingdoms of ships and swords, fueled by a relentless need to have more, to have bigger, to have the best. And for a while, that have was measured in furs, silver, and something far more valuable, slaves. The year is roughly 750. Europe is a patchwork of crumbling Roman settlements, struggling kingdoms, and a vague, unsettling quiet. The Franks are wrestling with internal squabbles, the Saxons are sharpening their axes, and the rest are, well, they're mostly trying to survive. But across the Baltic, a different story was unfolding. It started with a series of seemingly unconnected events, like the slow, deliberate carving of a path through the wilderness. Let's picture Gotland, a windswept island off the coast of Sweden, as a hub of frantic activity. Ships laden with furs and timber were setting sail eastward, navigating treacherous currents and dodging the watchful eyes of Slavic tribes. These weren't grand expeditions, not yet. They were small, opportunistic raids, a quick grab of resources, a taste of the unknown. Individuals, seasoned sailors, and hardened traders had been making the journey for decades, charting the familiar waters of the Gulf of Finland and the Mälar Valley. But something was shifting. A sense of purpose, a feeling that this wasn't just about scavenging, was beginning to coalesce. Then came the eastern route, a daring gamble through the icy waters of the Baltic Sea. Think of it as the first tentative steps onto a vast, uncharted continent. The key lay in the rivers, the Nemunas, the Venta, the Daugava, snaking their way through the lands of the Balts, Prussians, and Polans. These weren't just waterways, they were arteries pulsing with the lifeblood of trade, but they were also guarded. Each tribe controlled its stretch of river, demanding tribute, imposing taxes, and generally making life difficult for anyone trying to pass through. It was a tangled web of negotiations, a complex game of alliances and betrayals. And at the heart of it all, rising from the mist-shrouded shores of Lake Ladoga, was Staraja Ladoga. It wasn't a city in the conventional sense, not at first. It was more like a sprawling, chaotic encampment, a crossroads where cultures collided and fortunes were made and lost. Imagine a scene ripped from a fever dream, a jumble of square timber structures reminiscent of Slavic villages, nestled alongside longhouses built in the Norse style. The air thrummed with the shouts of merchants, the clang of hammers, and the murmur of a dozen different languages. Slavs, Scandinavians, Finns, Balts, even the elusive Sami, the people of the north, all jostled for space in this burgeoning market. It wasn't a peaceful coexistence. There were tensions, rivalries, and the ever-present threat of violence. But there was also something else, a shared hunger for wealth, a willingness to take risks, and a basic understanding that survival depended on trade. The first tangible proof of this transformation came in the form of tree ring chronologies, a meticulous record of the wood used to build the earliest structures. In 753, the ground was being laid for a settlement that would soon become a legend. It was the same year that other emporia, trading posts, and market centers were springing up across Europe, all experiencing a similar surge in activity. Staraja Ladoga wasn't built on grand plans or royal decrees. It emerged organically like a fevered dream, fueled by the simple desire to trade. The Volkhov River, a powerful artery flowing from the forests of Karelia, served as the primary route to the south, eventually leading to the Dnieper, and ultimately to the glittering markets of Byzantium, the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire. Think of it as a muddy, riverine deadwood, but with swords and a multitude of gods. A place where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. A place where a generous Ladogan could suddenly have 3 more people sitting at your table, eager for a share of the spoils. But don't be fooled by the romanticized image. Behind those welcoming smiles lurked a darker reality. Disappearances were commonplace, often swift and unmarked. The riverbanks held countless graves, silent testaments to the risks involved. By the end of the 8th century, Staraja Ladoga was thriving. It wasn't a city of elegant palaces and bustling squares. It was a rough and tumble frontier settlement, a melting pot of cultures and ambitions. The Scandinavians, it quickly became apparent, were the driving force behind this burgeoning trade. They weren't conquering the land, they were trading it, skillfully navigating the complex web of tribal politics and securing access to the lucrative markets of the East. But the Scandinavians weren't alone. The early traders were facing a difficult time. They were challenged by the Slavic tribes, who were wary of outsiders and fiercely protective of their territory. Raiding and commerce were intertwined, 2 sides of the same coin. The expansionist ambitions of the Svea kings of Sweden weren't just about territorial conquest, they were about securing access to the eastern trade routes. Events like the Salmi boat graves, a mass burial of Viking ships and their crews, served as a brutal reminder of the high cost of ambition. Meanwhile, across the narrow Norwegian coast, a different kind of drama was unfolding. The Sea Kings of the Midlands, a region stretching from Rogaland to Nordmore, were consolidating their power, carving out their own kingdoms through a combination of warfare and alliance. This wasn't a centralized empire, it was a collection of independent, fiercely competitive territories, each vying for control of the coastline and the lucrative trade routes. Avaldsnes, a small settlement nestled along the Karmsund Strait, became a key center of this emerging power structure. It was a place of 2 tiers, a wealthy agricultural elite controlling large estates inland, and a coastal elite focused on maritime trade and raiding. The courtyard assemblies, the traditional meeting places of the local communities, were undergoing a dramatic transformation. They were gradually being absorbed by the authority of the Sea Kings, a clear sign of centralization and the rise of a new form of governance. And then there were the things, the smaller, more localized assemblies that continued to operate in some areas like Helagoland. Their decline coincided with the rise of the Sea Kings, suggesting that the traditional forms of local governance were being superseded by the authority of the royal court. By the mid-8th century, the Norwegian coast was dominated by a dozen or so kingdoms, each ruled by a sea king, a warrior merchant whose power was derived not from lineage, but from his ability to command a fleet and control the seas. These weren't the kings of legend, with their divine right to rule. They were pragmatic, ruthless, and utterly focused on acquiring wealth and influence. The names of these sea kings, Adi, Beatty, Ekel, Gestal, are preserved in the sagas, whispered in skaldic poems, and listed in the genealogical records. They were pirates, raiders, and traders, figures of immense power and influence, who shaped the destiny of Scandinavia. They weren't building grand empires, they were amassing a collection of ships, slaves, and treasures, laying the foundation for the Viking Age. The raids on Western Europe, the sack of Lindisfarne, the burning of settlements in France weren't random acts of violence. They were the product of a complex system, driven by a combination of ambition, opportunity, and a thirst for wealth. The Sea Kings of the Norwegian Midlands were at the heart of this phenomenon, using their maritime power to dominate the trade routes and establish a network of alliances and dependencies. The markets and bazaars of Staraja Ladoga weren't just places to buy and sell goods. They were melting pots of cultures, filled with a babel of languages that gradually coalesced into a common trade tongue. Formal laws and regulations existed, but they were constantly overshadowed by local customs and traditions. The currency of the trade, furs, silver, and slaves, reflected the fundamental values of this world, the pursuit of wealth and the willingness to take risks. So was this a sudden eruption of violence and conquest or a gradual shift in power driven by economic forces? The answer, as always, is complicated. The Scandinavians weren't simply seeking to raid and plunder. They were building a new economic order, connecting the East and West and reshaping the map of Europe. And it all began in a forgotten market built on the bones of ancient rivers, a place where the echoes of forgotten gods still lingered in the mist-shrouded waters of Lake Ladoga. But what truly ignited this transformation? Was it the relentless ambition of the Scandinavian kings, the technological advancements in shipbuilding, or perhaps something far more subtle, a fundamental shift in human psychology, a desire to explore the unknown and seize the opportunities it offered? The answer, it seems, lies buried beneath the layers of history, waiting to be unearthed. And as we delve deeper into the mysteries of the Viking Age, one question remains. Could a forgotten market built on the bones of ancient rivers truly be the birthplace of a world-shaking age?